Audio Renaissance presents How Life Imitates Chess, Making the Right Moves from the Board to the Boardroom by Gary Kasparov with Mig Greengard. Read for you by Adam Grouper. Opening Gambit. The Secret of Success. I was a teenage chess star in the chess-mad Soviet Union and became used to interviews and public speaking at a young age. Apart from occasional questions about hobbies and girls, these early interviews focused solely on my chess career. Then, in 1985, I became the youngest world champion at the age of 22. And from then on, the type of questions I received changed dramatically. Instead of wanting to know about games and tournaments, people wanted to know how I had achieved my unprecedented success. How did I come to work so hard? How many moves ahead did I see? What went on in my mind during a game? Did I have a photographic memory? What did I eat? What did I do every night before going to sleep? In short, what were the secrets of my success? It didn't take long for me to realize that I was disappointing my audiences with my answers. I worked hard because my mother taught me to. How many moves ahead I saw depended on the position. During a game, I tried to recall my preparation and to calculate variations. My memory was good, but not photographic. I usually ate a heavy lunch of smoked salmon, steak, and tonic water before each game. Sadly, when I hit my late 30s, my physical trainer put an end to this diet. Every night before going to bed, I brushed my teeth. Not exactly inspiring material. Everyone seemed to be looking for a precise method, a universal recipe people could follow to achieve great results every time. Famous writers are asked about what type of paper and pen they use, as if their tools are responsible for their writing. Such questions, of course, miss the point that we are all one of a kind, the result of millions of elements and transformations running from our DNA to this afternoon. We each build our own unique formula for making decisions, and every day we strive to make the best of this formula, to identify it, evaluate its performance, and find ways to improve it. This audio program describes how my own formula developed, and how many people contributed to that development, directly and indirectly. The inspirational games of Alexander Alekhine, my first chess hero, find a place alongside the inspirational character of Winston Churchill, whose words and books I still turn to regularly. My parents, especially my mother, play an incalculable role, as do my teachers. The idea for How Life Imitates Chess came when I realized that instead of coming up with clever answers for the eternal what's going on in your head questions, it would be more interesting for me to actually find out. But the life of a chess professional, with its rigorous calendar of travel, play, and preparation, did not allow me much time for philosophical, as opposed to practical, introspection. When I retired from chess in March 2005, I finally gained the time and perspective to look back on my experiences, and can now, finally, share them in a useful way. This would be a very different book had I completed it before my dramatic career shift from chess to politics. First, I needed time to absorb the lessons that my life in chess had taught me. Second, my new experiences as a coalition leader, political organizer, and the public face of an opposition movement are forcing me to look at who I am and what I am capable of. Being passionate about advocating for democracy isn't enough. To build alliances and organize conferences requires me to apply my strategic vision and other chess skills in entirely new ways. After 25 years in a comfort zone of expertise, I stepped back and began to analyze my abilities so I could build and rebuild myself for these new challenges. The lessons I've learned and the insights I've gained are what I want to pass along to you, the listener of this audio program, so that you too may apply the most effective strategies of the world's greatest game to your own decision-making and use them to advance your personal and professional goals. Why chess? What makes chess such an ideal laboratory for the decision-making process? To play chess on a truly high level requires a constant stream of exact, informed decisions made in real time and under pressure from your opponent. What's more, it requires a synthesis of some very different virtues, all of which are necessary to good decisions: calculation, creativity, and a desire for results. If you ask a grandmaster, an artist, and a computer scientist what makes a good chess player, you'll get a glimpse of these different strengths in action. Emanuel Lasker of Germany, the second world champion, once observed, "Chess is above all a struggle." According to Lasker, the point is always to win, no matter how you define winning. The artist Marcel Duchamp was a strong and devoted chess player. At one point, he even gave up art for chess, saying the game has all the beauty of art and much more. Duchamp further affirmed this aspect of the game by saying, "I have come to the personal conclusion that while all artists are not chess players, all chess players are artists." And it is true that we cannot ignore the creative element, even though we have to harness it to the primary objective of winning the game. Then we come to the scientific aspect, the one most non-chess players tend to overemphasize: memorization, precise calculation, and the application of logic. These are the bedrock of chess and also of good decisions. Having spent a lifetime analyzing the game of chess and comparing the capacity of computers to the capacity of the human brain, I've often wondered, where does our success come from? The answer is synthesis. The ability to combine creativity and calculation, art and science, into a whole that is much greater than the sum of its parts. Chess is a unique cognitive nexus, a place where art and science come together in the human mind and are then refined and improved by experience. This is the way we improve at anything in our lives that involves decision-making, which is to say, everything. It is not at all surprising that the language of chess has insinuated itself into so many other pursuits. If you overheard a discussion that referred to the opening phase, sector vulnerability, strategic planning, and tactical implementation, you might assume a corporate takeover was in the offing. But it could equally refer to any weekend chess tournament. A CEO must combine analysis and research with creative thinking to lead his company effectively. A military leader has to apply his knowledge of human nature to predict and counter the strategies of the enemy. Of course, the fields of the business and military worlds are limitless compared to the confined 64 squares of the chessboard, but its limited scope makes chess a versatile model for decision-making. The standards of success and failure in chess are strict. If your decisions are faulty, your position deteriorates, and the pendulum swings toward a loss. If they are good, it swings toward a victory. Every single move reflects a decision, and with enough time, you can analyze to a fine certainty whether each decision you made was the most effective. Even in the complex real world, this kind of objective analysis can provide a great deal of insight into decision-making, which ultimately is the key to your success or failure. The stock market and the gridiron and the battlefield aren't as tidy as the chessboard, but in all of them, a single simple rule holds true. Make good decisions, and you'll succeed. Make bad ones, and you'll fail. I hope that the many stories I share in this audio program from my life in chess, and later my career in politics, will help you to gain insight into your own process as a decision maker. I hope you will begin to formulate your own plan and continue to grow and learn. This will require great honesty in your evaluation of yourself and how well you have fulfilled your potential. There are no quick fixes, and this is not an audio program of tips and tricks. It is a program about self-awareness and challenge, about how you can constantly challenge yourself and others so you can learn how to make the best possible decisions. What makes someone a better manager, a better writer, a better chess player? Not everyone performs at the same level or has the capacity to do so. What is critical is to find your own path to reach your peak, to develop your talents, improve your skills, and seek out and conquer the challenges that will push you to the highest level. And to do all this, we first need a plan. You will learn how to think strategically and how to cultivate your own unique talents. We'll cover the more practical aspects that go into decision-making, such as understanding the crucial synergy of material, time, and quality, as well as the more human arts of memory, fantasy, and intuition. All of these elements come into play as we strive to become more creative and effective as decision makers. A map of the mind. On my 6th birthday, I woke up to find an enormous globe next to my bed. It was the best present I have ever received. I had to rub my eyes to make sure it was real. I had always been fascinated by maps and geography, and my favorite childhood stories were the ones my father told me about the voyages of Marco Polo, Columbus, and Magellan. Our favorite game was to trace the journeys of these great explorers across the globe. Before long, I knew the capitals of all the world's countries, their populations, geography, industry, and everything else I could find out about them. These real adventure stories fascinated me more than any fairy tale could. I knew it must have taken incredible courage to be the first person to make the kind of journeys I read about. These stories kindled my own pioneer spirit. I wanted to blaze new trails, even if at that point in my life it meant little more than taking a new route on the walk home. Throughout my chess career, I sought out new challenges, looking for things no one had done before. The time of great explorers and emperors has passed, but there are still precious territories to discover. We can explore our own boundaries and the boundaries of our own lives. But before we go exploring, we'll need a map. Having a personalized map of your decision-making process is essential, and this audio program can only roughly chart the stages of observation and analysis that go into drawing that map. The map tells you which areas of your mind are well known to you, and which are still uncharted. It reveals your strengths, weaknesses, and areas as yet untested. Most important, you must look to develop your own map. There is no advantage in trying to identify the common denominator that links you to your friends or colleagues or opponents. We must all look higher and dig deeper. Move beyond the basic and universal. In theory, anyone can learn to play chess in half an hour, and the rules are, of course, the same for every man, woman, and child. When we first step beyond the rules, however, leaving that initial level where we are concerned only with making legal moves, we begin to form the patterns that distinguish us from everyone else who has ever pushed a pawn. Acquired patterns and the logic to employ them combine with our inherent qualities to create a unique decision maker. As time goes by, experience and knowledge are focused through the prism of talent, which can itself be sharpened, focused, and polished. This mix is the source of intuition, an absolutely unique tool that each of us possesses, and that we can continuously hone into an ever finer instrument. Here we begin to see the influence of individual psychology and our emotional makeup as it is expressed in our decisions, what we call style in a chess player. We cannot pick and choose which style we would prefer for ourselves. Personal style is not generic software you can download and install. You must instead recognize what works best for you, and then through challenge and trial, develop your own method, your own map. To begin, ask yourself, what am I lacking? What are my strengths? What type of challenges do I tend to avoid, and why? The method you employ to achieve success is a secret, because it can be discovered only by you analyzing your own decisions. This is what my questioners should really have been asking me about instead of my trivial habits. How did I push myself? What questions did I ask myself? How did I investigate and understand my strengths and weaknesses? And how did I use what I learned to get better and further define and hone my method? Those are a few of the questions I have asked myself, and this audio program contains an honest accounting of my pursuit of the answers. Better decision-making cannot be taught, but it can be self-taught. Let me explain. You must become conscious of your decision-making processes, and with practice, they will improve your intuitive, unconscious performance. This is required because as adults, we have already formed our patterns, good and bad. To correct the bad and enhance the good, you must take an active role in becoming more self-aware. This audio program will use anecdotes and analysis to open the doors to that awareness. Part 1 looks at the fundamental ingredients, the essential abilities and skills, strategy, calculation, preparation, that go into making effective decisions. In this section, we'll discuss how to better understand these essentials and cultivate them in ourselves. Part 2 is the evaluation and analysis phase. What changes are needed and why? Here we see the methods and benefits of our self-investigation. Part 3 examines the subtle ways we combine all of these things to improve our performance. Psychology and intuition affect every aspect of our decisions and our results. We must develop our ability to see the big picture and deal with and learn from the crises that we inevitably face in our lives. Such decisive moments are turning points. Every time you select a fork in the road knowing you won't be able to backtrack. We live for these moments, and in turn, they define our lives. We learn who we are and what truly matters to us. The secret, then, is to actively, consciously pursue these challenges instead of avoiding them. This is the only way to discover and to exploit all your gifts. Developing your personal blueprint allows you to make better decisions, to have the confidence to trust your instincts, and to know that no matter the result, you will come out stronger. There, inside each of us, is our unique secret of success. Part 1. Chapter 1. The Lesson. Personal Lessons from the World Champion. When I first played for the Chess World Championship in 1984, I was a young challenger up against a champion who had held the title for almost 10 years. I was 21 years old and had risen to the top of the chess world with such speed that I couldn't imagine that this last hurdle could block my way. I was therefore shocked when I quickly found myself down 4 losses without a win, only 2 defeats away from a humiliating rout. If ever there was a time for a change in strategy, this was it. Instead of giving in to my feelings of desperation, I forced myself to prepare for a long war of attrition. I switched to guerrilla warfare in game after game, reducing my risks, waiting for my chance. I could not afford to expose myself in an open clash, so I played cautiously, awaiting my chance. My opponent, fellow Soviet Anatoly Karpov, fell in with my plan for his own purposes. He wanted to teach the upstart a lesson by scoring a perfect 6-0 score, so he also played cautiously, instead of pressing his advantage and going in for the kill. Karpov was also inspired by the shadow of his predecessor as champion, Bobby Fischer. En route to the title he claimed in 1972, the American had scored 2 perfect 6-0 wins against world-class opponents, both times without ceding even a draw. Karpov had it in mind to, in some measure, imitate this legendary feat when he altered his strategy against me. But conjuring Fischer's ghost turned out to be a serious mistake. An incredible 17 games followed without a decisive result. It appeared my new strategy was working. The match dragged on month after month, breaking every record for the duration of a world championship match. My team and I spent so much time thinking about how Karpov played, which strategies he would employ, that I uncannily felt as if I were becoming Karpov. During the hundreds of hours of play and preparation, I also got a good look at my own play and at my own mind. Up until that point in my career, everything had come easily for me. Winning had simply become the natural state of things. Now I had to focus on how I made my decisions, so I could fix whatever was going wrong. It was working. But when I lost game 27 to go down 0-5, it looked as though I wasn't learning fast enough to save the match. One more loss, and it would be 3 long years before I could even hope for another shot at the title. As the match entered its 3rd month, I stayed in my defensive crouch. I wasn't winning, but the change in style had made things much tougher for Karpov. I felt I was getting closer to solving the puzzle, while at the same time, my opponent was becoming more frustrated and tired. At last, the dam broke. After surviving Game 31, in which Karpov failed to land a decisive blow, I won Game 32 and went on the offensive. Another 5 weeks of drawn games followed, but the difference was that I was now creating more winning chances than my opponent. Meanwhile, the world began to wonder if the match would ever end. No championship match had ever gone beyond 3 months, and here we were entering the 5th. Karpov looked exhausted, and I started to press harder. After coming close to winning Game 46, I won Game 47 in crushing style. Could there be a miracle? Exactly at that moment, the organizers decided the players needed a break, and the next game was postponed for several days. Despite this unprecedented decision, I also won the next game. Suddenly, it was 3-5, and the momentum was on my side. Then, in a bizarre twist, on February 15, 1985, in Moscow, the president of the International Chess Federation, known by the acronym for its French name, Fédération Internationale des Échecs, or FIDE, Florencio Campomanes, responding to pressure from the Soviet sport authorities, called a press conference to declare that the match was canceled. After 5 months, 48 games, and thousands of hours of play and study, the match was over without a winner. We would have to return 6 months later to do battle again, and next time, there would be a limit of 24 games. Karpov was removed from immediate danger and could be content that he would hold on to his title a while longer. The official press release stated that Karpov accepted the decision and Kasparov abided it. A curious but accurate semantic distinction. I learned a huge amount from this long and grueling tutorial. In fact, for 5 relentless months, the world champion had been my personal trainer. Not only had I learned the way he played, I was now deeply in touch with my own thought processes. I was increasingly able to identify my mistakes and analyze why I made them. From that process, I learned how best to avoid making them again, to improve the decision-making process itself. This was my first real experience at questioning myself instead of relying only on my instincts. I recognized that I had been too aggressive due to overconfidence. This in turn made me predictable. Karpov's vast experience allowed him to exploit my constant attempts to attack his position directly. He understood my play better than I understood his, and more important, better than I understood my own. Karpov knew that I would consistently give up material for attacking chances, and he used this habit against me in that first match. Only when I began to rein in that instinct did I begin to put up effective resistance. That was the moment I first began to think about why I made the moves I made. When the second match got underway in Moscow, I didn't have to wait months for my first win. I won the very first game. The match was still a tough fight. I trailed for most of the early stages. But this time I wasn't the same innocent 21-year-old. I had patched the holes Karpov had so successfully exploited at the start of the first match. Now a savvy veteran at 22, I became world champion and went on to hold the title for 15 years. When I retired in 2005, I was still the highest-rated player in the world. But for a chess player, 41 is old. Still, I had remained at the summit for nearly 2 decades, while many of my opponents were in their teens. Becoming aware of the process. It wouldn't have been possible for me to stay at the top for so long without the education Karpov gave me about my own game. Not just revealing to me the weaknesses, but the importance of finding them for myself. I didn't fully realize it at the time, but the notorious marathon match showed me the key to success. It's not enough to be talented. It's not enough to work hard and to study late into the night. You must also become intimately aware of the methods you use to reach your decisions. Self-awareness is essential to being able to combine your knowledge, experience, and talent to reach your peak performance. Few people ever perform this sort of analysis. Every decision stems from an internal process, whether at the chessboard, in the White House, in the boardroom, or at the kitchen table. The subject matter of those decisions will be different, but the process can be very similar. With chess having been the focus of my life from such an early age, it is no wonder that I tend to see the rest of the world in chess terms. I find that the game is usually accorded either too much or too little respect by those who look at its 64-square world from the outside. It is neither a trivial pursuit, nor an exercise to be left only to geniuses and supercomputers. At the heart of the game is strategy, and that is where we must begin. Chapter 2. Strategy. The man who knows how will always have a job. The man who also knows why will always be his boss. Ralph Waldo Emerson. Success at any speed. Imagine learning how to play chess from a primer that's missing a few pages. The pages you have teach you how to set up the board, how to move and capture the enemy pieces, but say nothing about checkmate, nothing about the end of the game. Learning from such a book, you could become competent at calculation and proficient at maneuvering, but you'd have no higher objectives. Without a goal, your play would be aimless. You might be a master tactician, but you'll have no sense of strategy. The distinction between tactics and strategy will be important to us throughout this section. Whereas strategy is abstract and based on long-term goals, tactics are concrete and based on finding the best move right now. Tactics are conditional and opportunistic, all about threat and defense. No matter what pursuit you're engaged in, chess, business, the military, managing a sports team, it takes both good tactics and wise strategy to be successful. As Sun Tzu wrote centuries ago, strategy without tactics is the slowest route to victory. Tactics without strategy is the noise before defeat. Let us begin with the big picture, with strategy. The old chess saying, "A bad plan is better than no plan at all," is more clever than true. Every step, every reaction, every decision you make must be done with a clear objective. Otherwise, you can't make anything but the most obvious decisions with the confidence that the decision is really to your advantage. In the second round of the 2001 Chorus tournament in the Netherlands, I faced one of the tournament underdogs, Alexei Fedorov of Belarus. This was the strongest tournament he had ever played in, and the first time we had ever met at the board. He quickly made it clear that he did not intend to show too much respect for the august surroundings or for his opponent. Fedorov quickly abandoned standard opening play. If what he played against me had a name, it might be called the kitchen sink attack. Ignoring the rest of the board, he launched all of his available pawns and pieces at my king right from the start. I knew that such a wild, ill-prepared attack could only succeed if I blundered. I kept an eye on my king and countered on the other side or wing and in the center of the board, a critical area where he had completely ignored his development, the term we use in chess to describe the deployment of your pieces for battle. It was soon apparent that his attack was entirely superficial, and he resigned the game after only 25 moves. I admit I didn't have to do anything special to score this easy victory. My opponent had played without a sound strategy and eventually reached a dead end. What Fedorov failed to do was to ask himself early on what conditions would need to be fulfilled for his attack to succeed. He decided he wanted to cross the river and walked right into the water instead of looking for a bridge. The lesson here is that if you play without long-term goals, your decisions will become purely reactive, and you'll be playing your opponent's game, not your own. As you jump from one new thing to the next, you will be pulled off course, caught up in what's right in front of you instead of what you need to achieve. Take the 1992 American presidential campaign, the one that took Bill Clinton to the White House. During the Democratic primaries, it seemed as if every day brought a new scandal that was sure to destroy Clinton's candidacy. His campaign team reacted instantly to each new disaster. But they weren't only reacting. They made sure each press release also hammered home their candidate's message. The general election against President Bush followed a similar pattern. Against each attack, the Clinton team responded with a defense that also refocused the debate on their own message. The now famous, "It's the economy, stupid," constantly reinforcing their own strategy. 4 years earlier, by contrast, the Democratic candidate, Michael Dukakis, had become completely distracted by his opponent's aggressive tactics. People only heard him defending himself, not presenting his own message. The 1992 Clinton team knew that it wasn't only about how quickly they responded, but how well their responses fit in with their overall strategy. Before you can follow a strategy, however, you have to develop one. Why turns tacticians into strategists? The strategist starts with a goal in the distant future and works backward to the present. A grandmaster makes the best moves because they are based on what he wants the board to look like 10 or 20 moves in the future. This doesn't require the calculation of countless 20-move variations. He evaluates where his fortunes lie in the position and establishes objectives. Then he works out the step-by-step moves to accomplish those aims. Imagine doing that regularly at work or even in your private activities. We all have hundreds of personal and professional objectives, but they are usually vague, unformed wish lists instead of goals that can form the basis of a strategy. I want to make more money is like saying, I want to find true love, or I want to win this game. A wish isn't a goal. To take a practical example, almost everyone at some point desires to find a better job. Only when you have a thorough understanding of why you want to change should you begin. Maybe it's not just the job. Maybe you need an entirely new career. Or perhaps you can make changes at your current workplace. You won't know what you are looking for until you are aware what conditions will satisfy you. When you do begin your search, your guide is that list of intermediate objectives that add up to your goal of better job. For example, if money isn't your biggest issue in your current position, you shouldn't be tempted by a job that offers more cash, but won't change the things that are really driving you crazy where you are now. So for every move, always ask, why? And continue to ask it every time you come up with an answer or a new idea. It's an essential part of the chess player's discipline that can be applied to just about every pursuit in life. These intermediate objectives are essential if we are to create conditions favorable to our strategy. Without them, we're trying to build a house starting from the roof. Too often, we set a goal and head straight for it without considering all the steps required to achieve it. What conditions are necessary for our strategy to succeed? What sacrifices will be required? What must change, and what can we do to induce or enable those changes? And most important, why are we doing what we're doing? In his book on Japanese business, Kenichi Ome summed up the role of the strategist this way. The strategist's method is to challenge the prevailing assumptions with a single question: why? Why is the question that separates visionaries from functionaries, great strategists from mere tacticians. You must ask this question constantly if you are to understand and develop and follow your strategy. When I watch novice students play chess, I'll see a terrible move and ask the student why he played it. Often he'll have no answer at all. Obviously, something in his brain pushed that move forward as the best choice. But it goes without saying that it wasn't part of a deeper plan with strategic goals. Everyone would greatly benefit from stopping before each move, each decision, and asking, why this move? What am I trying to achieve? And how does this move help me achieve it? Chess clearly shows us the power of why. Every move has a consequence. Every move either fits into your strategy or it doesn't. If you aren't questioning your moves consistently, you will lose to the player who is playing with a coherent plan. Let us now turn our attention to tactics, the method of carrying out your strategy. Imagine a day trader who must decide buy or sell a dozen times a day. He looks at the numbers, analyzes as much as he can, and makes the best decision possible in the limited time available. The more time he spends, the better his decision will be. But while he is thinking, the opportunity to decide is passing. It's a difficult position. But his concern is mainly tactical, not strategic. Effective tactics result from alertness and speed. This is obvious. But they also require an understanding of all the possibilities at hand. Experience allows us to instantly apply the patterns we have successfully used in the past. Tactics involve calculations that can tax the human brain. But when you boil them down, they are actually the simplest part of chess and are almost trivial compared to strategy. Think of tactics as forced, planned responses, basically a series of if-then statements that would make a computer programmer feel right at home. If he captures my pawn, I will play my knight to e5. Then if he attacks my knight, I'll sacrifice my bishop. Then if... Of course, by the time you get to the fifth or sixth if, your calculations have become incredibly complex because of the sheer number of possible moves. The chance of making a mistake increases the further ahead you look. A tactician feels at home reacting to threats and seizing opportunities on the battlefield. When your opponent has blundered, a winning tactic can suddenly appear and serve as both means and end. Imagine a soccer game where the coaches have spent months training their players in complex strategies and set plays. But if the opposing goalkeeper slips on the grass, you toss strategy to the side and shoot for the goal without hesitation, a purely tactical reaction. Every time you make a move, you must consider your opponent's response, your answer to that response, and so on. A tactic ignites an explosive chain reaction, a forceful sequence of moves that carries the players along on a wild ride. You analyze the position as deeply as you can, compute the dozens of variations, the hundreds of positions. If you don't immediately exploit a tactical opportunity, the game will almost certainly turn against you. One slip and you are wiped out. But if you seize the opportunities that your strategy creates, you'll play your game like a grand master. An ever-expanding example. In March 2004, not long after the 100th anniversary of the Wright brothers' famous first flight at Kitty Hawk, I gave a lecture titled Achieving Your Potential to an audience of executives in Interlaken, the Swiss mountain resort. To illustrate the danger of a lack of strategic vision, I chose the example of the Wright brothers and their famous invention. Hundreds of engineers had died attempting to invent a flying machine, and Orville and Wilbur succeeded, going down, or up, in history for all time. And yet they never believed the airplane would amount to much beyond novelty and sport. The American scientific community shared that view, and soon the USA fell way behind in the aircraft business. The Wright brothers failed to envision the potential of their creation, and it was left to others to exploit the power of flight for commercial and military purposes. To this cautionary tale, I added that we don't fly on Wright airplanes today. America needed someone who combined entrepreneurial vision with engineering prowess, and that man was William Boeing. More than just a strategist, Boeing was also a creative tactician. In 1910, American Scientific Magazine wrote that the idea that the plane could revolutionize the world is the wildest exaggeration. Back then, William Boeing didn't even know how to fly and was living in Seattle, Washington, far from the East Coast where most aeronautic research was going on. Boeing, who dropped out of engineering classes at Yale, didn't have the technical knowledge of the Wright brothers. What he had was a vision and the ability to develop a strategy to achieve it. Boeing saw the commercial potential of airplanes and understood that technological excellence was the required foundation for a company that wanted to excel in, and even dominate, this new field. But to fulfill his vision, several major obstacles, distance limitations and safety issues in particular, had to be overcome. Boeing bet his life savings that the technology would catch up with his vision before he went broke. But he didn't just wait around for this to happen. His strategy, better technology. His tactic, Boeing financed construction of a wind tunnel at a local university to attract the engineers he needed. In 1917, the American military was getting ready to enter World War I. They needed planes, and Boeing had a new design he thought they could use. The problem was that the Navy was testing new planes 3,000 miles away in Florida, too far to fly the little planes. Boeing knew that this was his crucial opportunity, so his team figured out how to take the planes apart, box them up like pizzas, and ship them across the country. It was a brilliant tactical maneuver. That modest success allowed Boeing to continue for a few more years, during which time his struggling airplane factory also produced boats and, believe it or not, furniture. Boeing backed up his intuition about the future of commercial flight by employing countless clever tactics and maneuvers in the service of his long-term plan. He continued to hire the most talented engineers and invest in research. When mail delivery and passenger travel, plus Charles Lindbergh's sensational New York to Paris flight, created a real boom, Boeing and his superior technology were ready and waiting to dominate the industry. Play your own game. A key to developing successful strategies is to be aware of your strengths and weaknesses, to know what you do well. Two strong chess players can have very different strategies in the same position, and they might be equally effective, leaving aside those positions in which a single forced winning line is available. Each player has his own style, his own way of solving problems and making decisions. Two Soviet leading lights of opposing schools of chess thought became world champions. Mikhail Botvinnik, who first became world champion in 1948, and who would later become my teacher, trusted in immense self-discipline, hard work, and scientific rigor. His rival, Mikhail Tal, cultivated his wild creativity and fantasy, caring little for methodical preparation. Thomas Edison famously claimed that genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. This formula certainly worked for Edison and Botvinnik, but would never have worked for Tal, or for Alexander Pushkin, the founder of modern Russian literature. Pushkin's love of the fast life, of gambling and romance, fed his creation of some of the greatest works in the Russian language. Tigran Petrosian, another former world champion, perfected what we chess players called prophylaxis, the art of preventative play, strengthening your position and eliminating threats. Petrosian defended so well that his opponent's attack was over before it started, perhaps even before he'd thought of it himself. His perfect defenses would leave opponents frustrated and prone to making errors, and Petrosian, alert to every small opportunity, exploited these mistakes with ruthless precision. When I played Petrosian in the Netherlands in 1981, I was 18 and Petrosian 52. I was eager to avenge losing to him earlier in the year in Moscow, where I had developed an impressive attacking position that exploded in my face. At the time, I thought it was an accident, but then it happened again. Every time it looked as if my offensive were crashing through, he would calmly make a little adjustment. All my pieces were swarming around his king, and I was sure it was only a matter of time before I would land the decisive blow. But where was it? I started to feel like a bull chasing a toreador around the ring. Exhausted and frustrated, I made one mistake, then another, and lost the game. Incidentally, something similar occurred a year later at the World Cup in Spain, when the defensive Catenaccio style of the Italians triumphed over the attacking Jogo Bonito of the Brazilians. Sometimes the best defense is the best defense. I had to change my approach, and I did, inspired by an extraordinary piece of advice from the man who took the world title from Petrosian in 1969, Boris Spassky. Spassky's own experiences against Petrosian had followed a pattern similar to mine. He first fought the defensive master for the World Championship in 1966 and was turned back in a tight contest. He went into their match believing, wrongly, that Petrosian didn't play sharp attacking chess because he lacked the skills to do so. Spassky complicated at all costs, only to find his attacks brilliantly repelled by the wily world champion. 3 years later, Spassky demonstrated much more respect for Petrosian's skill. In their 1969 match, he played a more balanced game and triumphed. So before I played Petrosian again, less than a year after the defeats I just described, I spoke with Spassky, who was playing in the same tournament in Yugoslavia. He counseled me that the key was to apply pressure, but just a little, steadily. Squeeze his balls, he told me in an unforgettable turn of phrase. But just squeeze one, not both. Over the next 2 years, I evened the score by twice beating Petrosian with a quiet positional style, almost the style of Petrosian himself. Those 2 losses had given me a deep respect both for Petrosian's abilities and for the art of defense in chess. But I also realized that such a style wasn't for me. I always wanted to be on the attacking side, and my game strategies reflected that. The lesson? You must always be aware of your limitations, and also of your best qualities. This knowledge allows you to both play your own game and adapt when it is required. My aggressive, dynamic style of play fits my strengths and my personality. Even when I am forced on the defensive, I am constantly looking for a chance to turn the tables and counterattack. And when I am on the offensive, I'm not content to seek modest gains. I prefer sharp, energetic chess with pieces flying all over the board and where the player who makes the first mistake loses. Other players, including the man I defeated for the World Championship, Anatoly Karpov, specialize in the accumulation of small advantages. They risk little and are content to slowly improve their position until their opponent cracks. But all of these strategies, defensive, dynamic, maneuvering, can be highly effective in the hands of someone who understands them well. Nor is there a single best type of strategy in business. Risk takers coexist with conservative managers at the top of Fortune 500 companies. Perhaps 50% of a CEO's decisions would be made in identical fashion by any competent business person. Just as many chess moves are obvious to any strong player, regardless of his style. It's that other 50%, or even the most complicated 10%, where the difference is made. The best leaders appreciate the particular imbalances and key factors of each situation and can devise a strategy informed by that understanding, and they trust in what they know to be their best qualities. Nokia CEO Jorma Ollila turned the Finnish company into the mobile phone leader with an unorthodox, even chaotic style that turned convention on its head at every opportunity. Top managers were asked to swap jobs. Research and development staff met directly with customers. And the company's chief phone designer once compared its management to the way a jazz band improvises together. This flexible, dynamic approach was ideal for the fast-paced world of mobile technology. Such a loose and energetic style might not be so successful in another industry, or another country, or with another CEO. For decades, IBM built its business on a conservative, even stodgy reputation. In the world of office machinery and mainframes, that stood for reliability, which was far more important to IBM's business customers than image. New mobile phone models come out every month, while IBM was selling and servicing machines over 5-year and even 10-year periods. In the eyes of their customers, this very conservatism was a virtue. Rapid changes would have panicked IBM's clients. You cannot always determine the battlefield. Of course, you don't become a world champion without being able to play in different styles when necessary. Sometimes you are forced to fight on unfamiliar terrain. You can't run away when conditions aren't to your liking. The ability to adapt is critical to success. I was forced to adapt during my advance on the road to the World Championship in 1983. I was a 20-year-old upstart taking on the 52-year-old Viktor Korchnoi, a 2-time World Championship finalist who is still playing strong chess today at the age of 75. Unsurprisingly, the veteran controlled the tempo in the early stages of our 12-game qualification match. He won the first game and consistently prevented me from getting into the sort of open attacking positions I enjoyed. Instead of continuing to be frustrated in my attempts to change the character of the games, I decided my best chance was to go with the flow. Instead of making sharp moves that I thought were more in my style, I played the best solid moves available, even if they led to quiet positions. Freed from the psychological difficulty of trying to force the issue in each game, I could just play chess. Korchnoi forced me to fight on his terrain, but once I was conscious of it, I was able to adapt, fight, and win. I won games 6 and 7 to take the lead, when Korchnoi decided to try to turn the tables. In Game 9, he switched to a tactical style, trying to surprise me with aggressive play. But having lost the battle on his territory, he wasn't able to make a successful transition to fighting on mine, and he suffered a devastating loss. This experience of adapting under fire was most helpful when I had to do the same under even less favorable conditions against Karpov in our World Championship match a year later. As any reader of Darwin knows, the failure to adapt almost always brings dire consequences. A classic example comes from American history in 1755, when George Washington was a volunteer aide-de-camp fighting in the British Army against French and Indian forces. The British made almost no effort to adapt to the frontier warfare practiced by their enemies. Their general, Edward Braddock, was a tragically typical case. He would line up his British redcoats in orderly rows out in the open to fire well-organized volleys into the forest as the French and Indian snipers picked them off from cover. Only when Braddock himself was finally killed in a disastrous battle could his few remaining men retreat, led by none other than Washington. Fast forward a couple hundred years to a less calamitous story, the Encyclopedia Britannica as it encountered the computer age. Perhaps the best-known brand name in reference books, their first blunder was to be late in releasing their products on CD-ROM. After all, they thought, who would want to replace all those beautiful books with a digitized version? Everybody, as we now know. From 1990 to 1996, sales of printed encyclopedias dropped to a tiny fraction of the reference market, and Microsoft's Encarta and others grabbed a huge market share. Next came the Internet, and its promise of almost unlimited customers around the world. Britannica charged for access at a time when everyone else was learning the market and building a customer base by giving content away for free. Britannica's business was predictably poor. A few years later, the dot-com boom was busting, something I remember only too well from my first-hand experience with my own chess internet portal. The online advertising market collapsed entirely, just as Britannica finally decided to give away their content for free. No matter what they did, they were on the wrong side of change. What was responsible for Britannica's series of debacles? They were clearly well behind the curve when it came to moving from print to digital media. The failure of their internet strategies is more complex. Being too far ahead of your environment can be just as bad as lagging behind your competitors. Instead of relying on their huge brand advantage, they tried to outthink a new and unpredictable market and ended up fighting on a losing battlefield each time. A frequently changed strategy is the same as no strategy. Change can be essential, but it should only be made with careful consideration and just cause. Losing can persuade you to change what doesn't need to be changed, and winning can convince you everything is fine, even if you are on the brink of disaster. If you are quick to blame faulty strategy and change it all the time, you don't really have any strategy at all. Only when the environment shifts radically should you consider a change in fundamentals. We all must walk a fine line between flexibility and consistency. A strategist must have faith in his strategy and the courage to follow it through, and still be open-minded enough to realize when a change of course is required. One of the tensest games of my life saw my opponent fail to have faith in his own plans. In 1985, I was locked in yet another battle with my longtime foe Anatoly Karpov. It was the final game of our second World Championship match, and I was in the lead by a single point. He had the advantage of the white pieces, and if he won, he would draw the match and retain the title for 3 more years. He played aggressively right from the start and built up an impressive attacking position against my king. Then came the critical decision whether to completely commit to his attack by pushing his pawn forward against my kingside, or to continue with more circumspect preparations. I think we both knew that this was the critical moment in the game. Karpov decided against the push, and the opportunity was gone. After spending the first 20 moves of the game preparing a direct assault, he got cold feet and missed his chance. Suddenly, I was in my element, counterattacking instead of defending. The game entered complications on my terms, not my opponent's, and I brought home the victory that made me the world champion. When it came time to play for the kill, Karpov played a move that fit his prudent style, but not the win-at-all-costs situation that he himself had created. His personal style was in conflict with the game strategy that was required in order to win, and he veered off course. But Karpov is a cunning strategist and learned from his mistakes. The lesson he took away from this critical game was to almost entirely stop opening with his king's pawn. Karpov recognized that at key moments, his style wouldn't fit the sharp positions it created. He learned and adapted and stayed near the top for many, many years because he was quick to recognize that he needed to change. Again, we return to the power of why. You must know what questions to ask and ask them frequently. Have conditions changed in a way that necessitates a change in strategy, or is a small adjustment all that is required? Have fundamental goals changed for some reason? Why have the conditions changed? Why are my results not as good as they once were? Avoid change for the sake of change. Military history is full of examples of commanders who got carried away by the action on the battlefield and forgot about strategy. The French forces were routed by the English at Agincourt in 1415, when the French cavalry allowed a long-distance volley of arrows to provoke them into a disorderly charge. The French knights, out of formation and charging across muddy terrain, were repeatedly cut down. It was a downfall of arrogance. When your opponent complicates things, there is a strong temptation to look for a refutation of his idea, to pick up the gauntlet, to rise to the challenge. Of course, this is exactly what he wants, and why such distractions must be resisted. If you have already decided on a good strategy, why drop it for something that suits your opponent? Avoiding this trap requires extraordinarily strong self-control. Sticking with a plan when you are winning sounds simple, but it's easy to become overconfident and get caught up in events. Long-term success is impossible if you let your heat-of-the-moment reactions trump careful planning. An interesting side effect of my years of success was that some of my opponents chose to employ unorthodox variations to take our games into original channels. Here, they felt, my long experience would be nullified, and they would be better prepared for the unusual positions. The problem, as many of these players discovered, is that most of their original concepts were rare for good reason. The virtue of innovation only rarely compensates for the vice of inadequacy. Don't watch the competition more than you watch yourself. We must also avoid being distracted from our strategic path by the competition. If you are employing a powerful and successful strategy, whether gaining space on the chessboard or market share in global commerce, the competition will try to trip you up by getting you to abandon it. If your plans are sound and your tactical awareness is good, your competitor can only succeed with your help. Against solid strategy, diversionary tactics will either be insufficient or flawed. If they are insufficient, you can and should ignore them, continuing along your path. If they are radical enough to force you from your path, they are likely flawed in some way, unless you have blundered. Often an opponent is so eager to get you to change your course that he fatally weakens his own position in the attempt. Even if the competition isn't interfering directly, we can divert ourselves. When I'm playing in a head-to-head event, such as a world championship match, I only have one guy to watch, and he's sitting right across the board from me. It's a zero-sum situation. I win, he loses, or vice versa. But in a tournament with a dozen players, what goes on in the other games can have an impact on my own success. It's like any business with multiple partners and competitors. If United and American Airlines start talks, Continental has to pay attention. In 2000, I was playing in a strong tournament in Sarajevo. Entering the final round, I was in the lead by the slimmest of margins, a half point. In chess, wins are worth a point, draws half a point, losses no points. Two of the world's top players were right behind me, Alexei Shirov and Michael Adams. It would have been nice to face one of them for all the marbles in the final round, but we were all playing different opponents. If I drew my game and Adams or Shirov won, they would tie with me for first place. If I lost, I could drop as far as third. So before my game, I had to decide whether to play cautiously or go all out for a win. It would be heroic to enter every battle with victory or death on our lips, but few situations in chess or life are as dire as when those words were written from the Alamo. First off, I had the disadvantage of the black pieces. Next, there was my opponent, an outsider in this elite event. Sergei Movsesian, representing the Czech Republic, had done poorly in the tournament, but had defeated two of the highest-rated participants in the previous 2 rounds. I confess that our contest also had a minor personal element. The year before, writing about a tournament in Las Vegas, I had dismissed Movsesian and a few other players as tourists, and he had taken his displeasure over my characterization to the press. Now this tourist surely wanted my scalp as a souvenir. Then I had to consider the day's other matchups. Shirov's opponent, the Frenchman Bacrot, had already lost 5 games and was at the bottom of the standings. I couldn't count on him gaining a draw when his opponent had everything to play for. Incorporating that information into my game strategy, I went on the attack from the start against Movsesian. The game was turning my way when I got up to check on my pursuers. I knew that if I won my game, how they did would be irrelevant, but it was hard not to watch. If they both drew or lost, it would be folly for me to take undue risks in my own game. In that case, I could draw and still win the tournament. Admittedly, thoughts like that made it hard to focus on my own game. There is a precarious balance between knowing what your competition is up to and becoming distracted from the factors you control directly. Thus, it was almost a relief to see that both Shirov and Adams were on the way to victory. I knew for sure that I had to ignore them and focus on my own game, and that it was now a matter of winning at all costs. As soon as I sat back down in my chair, any cautious strategies were tossed out the window. In the end, all 3 of us won, so I kept my slim lead and took first place. Lesson: don't spend so much time worrying about the other guy that you lose sight of your own goals and your own performance. Once you have a strategy, employing it is a matter of desire. Finally, we come to the hardest part of developing and employing strategic thinking: the confidence to use it and the ability to stick to it consistently. Once you have your strategy down on paper, the real work begins. How do you stay on track? And how do you know when you have slipped away from thinking strategically? We stay on track with rigorous questioning of our results, both good and bad, and our ongoing decisions. During a game, I question my moves, and after the game, I question how accurate my evaluations were in the heat of battle. Were my decisions good ones? Was my strategy sound? If I won, was it due to luck or skill? When the system fails or fails to operate quickly enough, disaster can strike. In 2000, I met a former pupil of mine, Vladimir Kramnik, in a 16-game match for the World Chess Championship, my 6th title defense. I had won the title back in 1985, and headed into this match, I had been playing some of the best chess of my life. In other words, I was ripe for defeat. Years of success had made it difficult for me to imagine I could lose. Going into that match, I had won 7 consecutive Grand Slam tournaments in a row, and I wasn't aware of my own weaknesses. I felt I was in great form and unbeatable. After all, hadn't I beaten everyone else? With each success, the ability to change is reduced. My longtime friend and coach, Grandmaster Yuri Dekoyan, aptly compared it to being dipped in bronze. Each victory added another coat. When he played black in our match, Kramnik shrewdly chose a defense, the Berlin variation of the Ruy Lopez, in which the powerful queens quickly came off the board. The game became one of long-range maneuvering rather than dynamic hand-to-hand combat. Kramnik had evaluated my style and had rightly assessed that I would find this kind of tranquil play boring and that I would unwittingly let down my guard. I had prepared intensely and was ready to fight on perhaps 90% of the chess battleground, but he forced me to play on the 10% he knew better and that he knew I would least prefer. This brilliant strategy worked to perfection. Instead of trying to wrest the games back to positions where I would be more comfortable, I took up his challenge and tried to beat him at his own game. This played right into Kramnik's hands. I was unable to adapt, unable to make the necessary strategic changes quickly enough, and I lost the match and my title. Sometimes the teacher must learn from the student. In the long run, I learned that I needed to be more flexible about the kinds of chess positions I enjoy. But I could have avoided this painful lesson through greater vigilance, by working harder to find and repair my weaknesses before Kramnik could exploit them. Every leader in every field, every successful company or individual, got to the top by working harder and focusing better than someone else. The top achievers believe in themselves and their plans, and they work constantly to ensure those plans are worthy of their belief. It becomes a positive cycle, work reinforcing desire that spurs more work. Questioning yourself must become a habit, one strong enough to surmount the obstacles of overconfidence and dejection. It is a muscle that can be developed only with constant practice. In chess, we see many cases of good strategy failing due to bad tactics, and vice versa. A single oversight can undo the most brilliant concepts. Even more dangerous in the long run are cases of bad strategy succeeding due to good tactics, or due to sheer good fortune. This may work once, but rarely twice. This is why it is so important to question success as vigorously as you question failure. Pablo Picasso nailed it when he said that computers are useless. They can only give you answers. Questions are what matter. Questions, and discovering the right ones, are the key to staying on course. Are our tactics, our day-to-day decisions based on our long-term goals? The wave of information threatens to obscure strategy, to drown it in details and numbers, calculation and analysis, reaction and tactics. To have strong tactics, we must have strong strategy on one side and accurate calculation on the other. Both require seeing into the future.